Hello there. Welcome back to Exit to Excel. This is the podcast where we are taking all the chaos in the job market and confusion and frustration with your career and turning them into championship moves. My name is Latanya. They call me LT, and I spent 25 years as an HR business partner in corporate America. I have also been laid off 4 times over the course of my career. And instead of going back into corporate America, I've decided to create this platform to share all the inside scoop of what goes on in the boardrooms to share with you so that you can get all the tea and use me as your secret weapon. Now, if you've been following us, then thank you. I appreciate you. And if this is your first time, then welcome. But for any of you, if you have not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Please hit the like button and please share this with somebody who can use it. As we're reading in the news every day, people are getting laid off. Unfortunately, people are getting laid off without any direction or support or resources. So, this platform is actually for this audience, for those of you who don't have an outplacement company to assist you. So, also follow me on my social media. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Exit to Excel, and I'll be coming to LinkedIn very, very soon. So, again, please hit the like button, share button, and subscribe. Now, for today, I want to finish talking about interviews. If you watched the episode from last week, my last episode, I talked about the 5 most popular behavioral questions that you are more than likely going to get in an interview. So check that out if you haven't already. Now, for today, I'm talking about the things that may throw you a curveball. Okay. These are the panel interviews, the hypothetical questions, the awkward silence after you answer a question, and looking at the interviewer who obviously doesn't want to be there. I've seen very qualified people, I mean, top of their game, and when they get into these scenarios in interviews, they fail miserably. And this is what sets apart the amateurs from the champions. So, welcome back to the Play to Win series. As you know, we've been talking about the whole job search process. So, again, today we're going to talk about these types of interviews. We're going to discuss the panel interviews strategy, how to handle managing multiple interviewers, the curveball questions and how to handle those, how to read the room and adapt in real time. And then I'm also going to give you some techniques to be able to use AI to role play. So let's get started. So let's first talk about the panel interview strategy. Now, the panel interviews, I would say sometimes they are designed to be intimidating, but even if that is not their intent, unfortunately, that is sometimes how they come across. They can be very intimidating because you are in a room. A lot of times you're on one side, they're on the other, and you have multiple people with different perspectives and different agendas and shooting you questions in rapid fire succession. Now, from the HR side, when we are participating, what we are looking for is how you handle pressure, how you're able to engage multiple stakeholders, how you're able to adapt your communication style, and also how you are able to stay composed when you're overwhelmed. Now, I'm going to give you 5 panel interview dynamics that you can look out for. Now, dynamic number 1 is the decision maker. This is the one person who has the veto power. This is usually the hiring manager. Now, you will want to find out beforehand who this is because you will want to direct most of your eye contact with them without ignoring the others. Now, dynamic number 2 is the skeptic. This is someone who doesn't really want to hire anyone, and they probably have already identified an internal candidate they want to place in the role. Don't try to win them over, focus on the others. Their negativity is not about you. Dynamic number 3 is the advocate. This is somebody who is already bought in. They, are on your side, even though you haven't yet interviewed, and they're probably going to ask you some softball questions. Now, the strategy for them is to give them the ammunition they need to be able to advocate for you later on. Dynamic number four is the technical expert. This is the person who is really going to test your depth of knowledge. This is probably a lower level person who is more involved in the day to day. Again, this is who you will want to be able to identify beforehand. And your strategy with this person is to be honest when you don't know something, because they're going to be able to sniff out the BS, so to speak. So you don't want to try to BS your way through it. Dynamic number five is the cultural fit checker. Now, this is usually the HR person or another team member, and they are there primarily to assess if you will fit with the team. So, the strategy for them is to show your authentic personality and not just your competence. Now, preparing for a panel interview is a little bit different than preparing for an interview with just one individual. So, again, before the panel interview, research every single person on LinkedIn. And if you've watched some of my previous episodes about company um, research, this is part of the research. And I've given you some ideas on how to do that. LinkedIn is just one way. I've also given you some AI prompts, but make sure you research them on LinkedIn as well as other social media and in the news. Two, understand their roles and their likely concerns, because you will want to speak to those concerns because, again, everyone is coming from a different perspective and they more than likely just want to know how you're going to solve their problems. Three, prepare questions specific to each person. Now, this is very important because remember, I said that an HR person is probably going to be there on the panel to assess your cultural fit. So, you will want to have a question prepared specifically for HR, not necessarily as it relates to cultural fit, but at least something that they can speak to. And then finally, bring enough resume copies for everyone. Now, a lot of times, the interviewers will already have a copy of your resume, but again, it's just a nice touch to show that you are prepared and to provide, one for everyone in case they don't have it. Now, during the panel interview, I can't tell you enough how important eye contact is. Now, you want to make eye contact with everyone when you introduce yourself. Also, please remember their names. You can jot down their names. You should have a notepad or, a notebook with you. Go ahead and jot down their names. It would be good to also jot down their titles so that you can glance down and be able to remember people's names in the interview. And at the end of the interview, even though you're introducing them or introduce yourself to each one individually, make sure you thank them collectively at the end. Now, I want to give you a technique on how you're going to answer your questions in these panel interviews. Start by addressing the person who asked the question. And again, it's good to say their name. And an example of this is, okay, Sarah, great question about how I would handle that situation. Then, as you're answering, you want to make contact with everyone. Now, I've been in panel interviews where the person act like there was only one or two people that they were talking to during the entire interview. And it's very off-putting. So even though, there's only going to be one person asking question, make sure you answer the question looking at everyone. Now, also be sure to reference previous questions as much as you can. That shows you're tracking, that shows you're paying attention, that shows you're connecting the dots. So a way to, do that is to say, hey, well, similar to what Mark asked earlier, so on and so forth. So in the, interview, how you want to think about it is directing 60% of your attention to the person who has asked the question and then 40% to all the others. Now, if you get contradictory questions, and trust me, you will probably get those, you want to be able to acknowledge both perspectives. And you can do this by saying something like, hey, I hear you asking about speed, but I also heard concerns about quality. In my experience, the right approach is, and in that way, you're able to address both. Now, in closing, address a question to each person if you can. And again, it would be best to be able to ask them a question relative to their specific area, or even better, their specific pain point. So, for example, Mark, from your Mark ops perspective, and then go from there, because that's going to show you that you see them as individuals. Now, after the interview, you will want to send individual emails to each person. Don't send a group email, okay? You want to send an individual email to each person referencing a question that they asked or an area that they were particularly interested in. Now, some of the common mistakes I've seen with panel interviews, and please don't do these, is again, only addressing the person who asked, or even worse, just addressing one or two people the entire time during the interview, getting flustered by rapid fire questions, trying to please everyone instead of being authentic, not taking a moment to think. Trust me, it is okay if you want to take, you know, 3, 5 seconds to collect your thoughts. Because again, it shows that you are confident enough that you are, comfortable with taking that time. So don't feel like you have to, fill in the gap or immediately respond. And then the last one is forgetting people's names. So that's why it's important you bring a notepad or something where you're able to jot everyone's names down. Now, let's talk about the curveball questions and how to handle those. The curveball questions are put in there to see how you think under pressure. And a lot of times, there really is no right or wrong answer to these questions. It's mainly just to see what your thought process is. So, the first type of curveball question is the hypothetical scenario. And it would be a question like, hey, what would you do if you had two major deadlines on the same day and you could only complete one? Well, what you don't want to say is, I'd work really hard to get both done because that's not realistic and that's not really what we're looking for. The championship framework, or the way you want to think about it, is one is first acknowledge the constraint, two, state your decision making criteria, three, walk them through your process. And then four, show transparent communication. So an example is here, hey, I'd assess which has the bigger business impact and which has flexibility and which affects more stakeholders. I then prioritize the higher impact deadline, immediately communicate with stakeholders about the delay, and propose a mitigation plan. There you see is a very thought out response, and it hits on all the points as acknowledging the constraint, going through your decision making criteria, walking them through your process, and being transparent. Okay. Now, another type of curveball question is the weakness question. And if you do not have an answer prepared for this question, just stop the video. I mean, just stop the video and give up, because everyone should be prepared to answer this question. And two, probably more importantly, is be self-aware enough to know what your weaknesses are. Now, the amateurs at this, the people who don't know what they're doing, they're interviewing, they're giving answers like, well, I'm a perfectionist. Everyone says that. Two is, hey, I work too hard. That's not a weakness. And a lot of people say that too. And three is, well, I don't really have any. That is not realistic. And it also lacks self awareness. Now, for the people who know how to answer this question, the people who are winning at the game, this is the framework that they use. So, one is you want to provide a real weakness that is not a deal breaker. So, let's say, for example, you are applying for a finance role, and a weakness of yours is attention to detail. That's probably not a weakness I would want to share for a finance role, right? You want to come up with something else that's not so critical to the role you're applying for, but you still want to be, for real, and you still want to give a real weakness. Now, the second thing is, which is probably the most important, is to show what have you done to learn from it or to address it. And then three, What is the proof that you are improving? So here's a similar example to what I've used. And it is, hey, early in my career, I struggled with delegating. I want to do everything myself. I've worked on this by implementing clear documentation, building in review checkpoints, and forcing myself to let go. In my last role, I successfully delegated our entire customer onboarding process, freeing up 10 hours per week. I still have to consciously push myself, but I have made significant progress. So, again, you have given a real weakness that isn't a deal breaker. You have explained the steps you've taken to address it. And you're talking about, or you talked about how you are still improving on it. So, again, giving a real weakness doesn't have to be a deal breaker. Curveball number three is the disagreement question. And this is another question that you will also want to prepare for in advance. So often the question is, tell me about a time that you disagreed with your manager. What we're really asking in that situation is, can you navigate conflict professionally? And we're also checking to see if you are going to badmouth your employer. So, the framework you can use to answer this question is focus on a professional disagreement on strategy, not personality. I've seen a lot of people go down that rabbit hole, and oftentimes it doesn't turn out too well when you're focusing more on a personality conflict than a conflict on strategy. The second thing is talk about how you presented your perspective. Thirdly, talk about the outcome, even if they didn't take your approach. And then four, finally, talk about what you learned. So, an example of that is here, and I'll paraphrase. My manager wanted to launch a product feature quickly to beat a competitor. I disagree because our user testing showed confusion. So, there you stated what the disagreement was in its own strategy. Now, how you present your perspective. I prepared data from testing, I presented a timeline, and outlined the risk of negative reviews. So, what was the outcome? The outcome was my manager appreciated the data, but decided speed was more important given competitive pressure, and then goes on to what they continue to do. Then, what you learned. I learned that sometimes strategic timing outweighs perfect execution, and that presenting data driven alternatives, even not when chosen, builds trust. So again, very impressive, very well thought out. So this is one of those questions that you really want to think through and prepare your response in advance, because when you're able to articulate something that organized and that logically, you're automatically going to stand out from the others. Curveball type number four is the silence. This is when they ask you a question and you finish and they just look at you like you had three heads and they don't say anything. Most of the time, people are going to keep talking, which is what you don't want to do. Don't keep talking. What we're doing is testing if to see whether you're going to get uncomfortable and keep talking and over explaining things, or if you're confident in your response and what you said. So how you want to respond is just smile slightly, make eye contact, stay silent, because again, they may be processing as well. Then, if it goes on for, let's say, more than 5 or 10 seconds, you can follow up and say, hey, did that fully answer your question? Or would you like for me to elaborate? Okay. But the main thing is don't fill the silence with nervous talking, which is probably what 85% of the people do. Now, curveball type number five is the impossible question. And you've probably seen these in interviews and also on assessments. And, the example I have here is like, how many gas stations are there in the United States? Okay, like that has anything to do with anything. But what they're really assessing is, can you structure your thinking and make reasonable assumptions? So to answer these, the framework you'll want to use is State what assumptions you make clearly in the very beginning. Show how you go through your math or your logic. 3, acknowledge the uncertainty, right? And then 4, arrive at a reasonable estimate. And so there you have an example there. I won't go through it, but the main thing is go through that and go through the steps, because I've seen people completely go blank or freeze and say, well, I don't know. And that doesn't bode well, right? But I'm going to give you an AI prompt, because I know this one can be very difficult to navigate through. I'm going to give you an AI prompt so that you can practice how to not only answer this type of curveball question, but all the other ones as well. So this is what you're going to put in the AI tool. You are an experienced interviewer known for challenging questions. I'm preparing for, and put whatever, your field is, and interviewing for whatever the specific role is. Then you're going to say, ask me 5 curveball questions testing: 1, my ability to think under pressure; 2, my problem solving approach; 3, how I handle ambiguity; 4, my self awareness; and 5, my strategic thinking. Then you're going to say, this is still the prompt. After each answer, evaluate: did I stay calm and structured? Was my thinking process clear? Did I show self awareness or strategic thinking? What could I improve? And rate me 1 out of 10. Make the questions difficult but fair. Now, let me explain something here. As I've mentioned, you really want to have responses prepared in advance for some of the most common questions, right? The 5 most popular behavioral questions, but also some of the curveball questions you can expect that I just gave you. I like to work in Claude to plan out my answers. And I know a lot of people are familiar with Claude. A lot of people use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is good, and I'm going to tell you how it's good, particularly for this. But for Claude, I like to use it to help me formulate my responses. Once I get my responses formulated, then I like to go to ChatGPT to have it play the interviewer. Now, ChatGPT now has the feature where it is able to talk to you and you're able to talk to it. And it is a game changer when it comes down to preparing for your interviews, because you can practice, it can give you feedback. And so once you have gotten your responses prepared, I would then use ChatGPT to do some role playing to make sure that you are answering the questions and is able to test you on all the points we just talked about. Okay. Another thing you need to be prepared for, we've talked about the panel interview, we talked about the curveball questions. The other thing is being able to read the room and adapt. Now, this is probably the most underrated interview skill, is the real-time adaptation. Now, when I say, or when I talk about reading the room, hopefully, you know what it means, but just to level set, reading the room in an interview scenario means that you are reading the energy level. Are the interviewers engaged? Are they leaning forward? Are they asking follow-up questions? If they are, then you're doing good. Keep going with the same approach. If they are checking their phones, looking bored, then you'll want to shorten your answers, and then ask them questions. Now, it's interesting. I remember one time I had a panel interview and it was 3 people, and only one person seemed engaged, and the other 2, one was just doodling, and I swear the other person was just looking at the wallpaper, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I could have sworn I just bombed it, but they called me to come back for a second interview even before I got home. So sometimes you can read the cues wrong, but it is good still to be able to adapt to make sure that you can kind of, keep things in the middle of the road. Now, the second signal is the question style. If they are wanting details, if they tend to be, very detail oriented, they want more details, then you'll want to give thorough star plus stories. Now, if they're the type, they just want quick answers, then hey, you just want to lead with the results and just offer to elaborate. Okay. So again, you have to be engaged. You got to pay attention to know exactly where you are and how you need to pivot. Signal number 3 is time pressure. If the interview is running long, you'll want to consider condensing your remaining answers. If they keep checking the time, just say, hey, I want to respect your time. What's the most important thing to cover? Okay. Signal number 4 is concerns. If they keep asking the same thing, there is something you have raised a red flag about. So I would try to figure out what it is without asking. And then once you're able to identify it, address it directly. Now, if you aren't able to quite put your finger on it and say, hey, is there a concern about something? Is there something I can address better or explain better? You can say, hey, I'm sensing concern about my lack of direct industry experience. Let me address that. Signal number 5 is the enthusiasm gap. When you have one interviewer who seems to be very enthusiastic and the others aren't, again, you don't want to ignore those who seem to be a little bit disengaged. It's best to go ahead and direct questions directly to them. Now, in order to adapt in real time, if you feel like you're losing them, don't give up. I know before I used to get very flustered and I would just kind of, give up thinking that, well, it's already shot. But, you don't want to do that. The first thing you want to do is, say, hey, let me give you high level first, and then I can go deeper if that's helpful. You can also shift from stories to bullet points. And you can also ask, hey, is this a type of level or is this a level of detail you're looking for? That's if you're losing them, because if you're losing them, you want to make sure your answers are a bit more brief. If they tend to want more, offer to elaborate more on any part that might be helpful. Ask them, hey, would an example be useful here? And another thing is notice which topics they lean into, because those you can probably elaborate more automatically. When you sense skepticism, go ahead and address it. Say, hey, I sense some concern about so and so. Allow me to speak to that directly. Now, the thing not to do is don't get defensive and don't provide specific proof. Just say, hey, I sense there's some, concern about this. So let me speak to that. And that should be sufficient. Now, if technical depth is needed, which sometimes, depending on the role, it may be, don't try to BS, because they will catch it. Because I trust you, trust me, there's probably somebody in there who is running the day to day that has been brought in specifically to be able to sniff out the BS. Be specific about what you know. And so an example of this is, well, hey, I haven't worked with that specific tool, but I have worked with whatever similar tool there is, and I'm a fast learner. Here's an example of when I had to learn so-and-so in 2 weeks. So look, championship interviews aren't scripted performances. They really are conversations where you adapt where and what the room needs. Okay. Now I'm going to give you another AI prompt to be able to role play. And again, this is a game changer to be able to really practice and get comfortable with some of these scenarios. So the prompt is, you are conducting an advanced interview simulation for whatever the role is. Create a challenging interview experience that includes: 1, start with one normal behavioral question to establish a baseline. 2, then throw me 2 to 3 curveball questions. 3, ask one impossible or estimation question. 4, go silent after one of my answers to see how I can handle it. And then 5, challenge one of my answers with skepticism. Then you want to say, based between questions, give me feedback on how I handle pressure, the quality of my thinking process, whether I stayed structured under stress, and if I adapted my communication style. Be tough. I want to practice the hardest scenarios so real interviews feel easy. Again, for this prompt, I would say use it in ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is able to talk to you as a person. You're able to respond and record your answers. And so, again, it's a game changer for being able to practice your interviews. You'll want to practice this 2 to 3 times before important interviews because the more you practice, I'm telling you, it increases your confidence. You're going to be more comfortable and you're going to, walk in like a champ. So, again, practice darn almost makes perfect. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you an advanced prep plan for the jobs that you really, 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 really want, and you got to close the deal. So, the advanced prep steps are 1 week before. Research all the interviews deeply. So, that goes beyond LinkedIn. You want to look at their company blog, their speaking engagements. 2, you want to prepare specific questions for each interviewer. And for the ones that you anticipate a case study, go ahead and complete a full practice version. And if you can get the case study in advance, that's even better. And then run the advanced AI role play simulation. 3 days before, practice the panel interview dynamics, have 2 to 3 people rapid fire questions, prepare answers to 5 of the most likely curveball questions you're going to get, and review the company's recent challenges and news for business case awareness. The day before, mentally prepare. Visualize handling these tough situations confidently. Review your key proof points one at a time, and make sure you get sufficient rest the night before. Because if you're well rested, you're able to think more clearly and you're able to come across more confidently. Now, the day of the interview, remember, you're prepared for anything that they may throw at you. You know how to adapt and you can handle anything that they throw your way. So, look, after being in HR for 25 years and interviewing so many people, again, I've noticed it's even the most experienced and qualified candidates aren't necessarily the ones who interviewed the best. And sometimes they bombed some of these scenarios. And for that reason, they did not get an offer. The ones who were obviously prepared and were able to stay composed, give solid answers, think clearly under pressure, and adapted, those are the ones that more than likely was getting a call the next day to either come back for, another interview or to extend the offer. So these are some of the most common scenarios that you may encounter that will allow you to hopefully get the call to get that offer. So, next time we are going to be discussing these crazy AI interviews. So, you don't want to miss that one. But for this one, I wish you luck. If you have any questions, let me know. And look, if you are interested in this deck, comment below deck and I'll send it to you because I want everyone to win. We're getting to a very difficult season. So the more you have, the more you know, the more you are ready, the more you don't have to get ready. So comment deck below. And until the next time, I'll see you on Exit to Excel.